Okay. Welcome everyone to our latest speaker series. Today we have Coach Lee, Lee Anna Osei. Is that correct?
Osei.
Osei. I'm sorry. I already asked you and I already got it wrong. Lee Anna Osei. So Coach Lee, thank you very much for joining me today. Really excited to get to know you. You are our first basketball coach, so this is great. You are the head coach of the St. Francis Xavier women's basketball team, but also the founder of the Black Canadian Coaches Association. So really pleased to have you on the video and on the speaker series today. And maybe before we get into our discussion, I thought maybe you could give a bit of a background to the audience on who you are and how you ended up as coach at St. Francis Xavier.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Paul. I'm really grateful to be on this platform, and thank you to the Waterloo Minor Soccer Club for extending the invite to talk. So I was born and raised in Toronto. My mother immigrated into Canada, I believe, in the 1970s, and she came with a fourth grade education, not knowing a lick of English, and she was pregnant with one of my elder brothers. So she came here like many immigrants looking for a better opportunity for her kids. And so she's my superwoman. Grew up in Toronto, coming from a West African household though, being a female and wanting to play sports wasn't something that was accepted. It was a point of contention for as long as I could remember. In fact, my mother actually didn't see me play a game of basketball until I was a senior in university in Waterloo. I actually graduated from Waterloo University, but I got my introduction to high performance sport when I was maybe 12 or 13, playing for OBA, playing AAU. When I was right before I entered high school, our family moved up to Vaughan or Woodbridge, and a lot of it was because it just was really dangerous in the area that we were growing up in, the Gin and Finch community. I only stuck around for a little bit. I actually couldn't live at home any longer, and I bounced around quite a bit when I was in high school. I attended Eastern Commerce Collegiate Institute downtown Toronto, the perennial basketball powerhouse that unfortunately is now closed. But a lot of great people have walked through those doors. And when I was done high school, I was fortunate enough to have a number of scholarship offers. So I started my career at the University of Miami in Coral Gables, Florida. I was out there for close to a year and a half. Then I elected to transfer. The U was incredible. The experience was incredible. My teammates were incredible. Me and my head coach didn't get along as much, and didn't feel like I really was valued for being a student athlete. I felt more valued based on what I could do athletically. So I had considered my options. What should I do? I eventually settled on going to a junior college so that I wouldn't have to sit out, and I'd be eligible right away. So I went to a top 3 JUCO, Trinity Valley Community College. I graduated within the year with honors, had a great season, committed to another 4-year school for a scholarship. And at the time, probably been 3 or 4 years that I'd been like estranged from my mother and our family. And I got a call just out of the dark, and I had an older brother who was going through some real mental health concerns. And so my brother actually was always gifted, never played sport at all, and excelled academically. He was the first person in our family to graduate. So he was 2 years my senior, and he was working in the corporate world. He graduated with honors. I think he scored in like the top 5% of his chartered accountant exams and so forth. And there were just different challenges that I think with being my mom being a newcomer and with us being first generation, we didn't know how to help him. I'm not sure that he knew how to help himself. And unfortunately, at the end of that year, my brother passed away by suicide. And it really was a turning point in my life. I had decided to come home and really help. And his mental health, physical health started to disintegrate. He would have ups, he would have downs. At one point, there was physical abuse, and so I felt a lot of responsibility on my shoulders. So having really felt like I needed to take that gap year and work, and also kind of monitor things at home when my brother passed away, our family decided the best thing um, to do was for me to finish my degree. And so I went to Waterloo University, really in honor of my brother. And it was one of the best decisions I made from a sport standpoint, um, because the department was so welcoming to me. Also, logistically, I think it was the most practical thing to do. We had lost our house soon after and were homeless. I had a little sister as well who really took my brother's passing very difficult, and my family quite literally was torn apart. And So I was at Laurier for 3 years. We did some great things on the court, off the floor. I finished a three-time academic All-Canadian, and I was named the Outstanding Woman of Laurier. I received an award for distinction. I majored in history, minored in English, and then I did a one-year master's afterwards. Um, while I was finishing my master's, I moved back home with a close family friend, and I worked at the Jane and Finch Boys and Girls Club, and just things really came full circle because I was able to give back to the community that pretty much raised me. And I guess dating back to when I did come back from the States, I started an organization called CanLeads, like Canadian Athletes Basketball, and I found that being a female, being a visible minority, I became like a point of reference for a lot of families and players. And I had started coaching before I had left for university. I was coaching more on the guy side. But I was just like, oh man, like this is really cool. There's like a niche here, there's a market here. And I was really informally doing things like scouting services. I was writing for North Pole Hoops. I was coaching with Ontario basketball, helping with some talent identification stuff. And so I really continued that as much as I could. And that led to being able to coach with the provincial team for consecutive years, and going on the AU circuit. And then it also opened up the door for me to work as a full-time coach at TRC Academy, which is a prep school located in Brantford, Ontario, that competes in the Ontario Scholastic Basketball Association. So this is where like your Jamal Murrays and your Thon Makers, where guys, go there and then really make the jump to that high major university or the NBA itself. And that was an incredible experience. That led to me meeting more people, and I had a couple job offers actually to go to the States. Some grad assistant positions, some assistant coach positions, even some head coach positions. But I just felt like with what we had done with CanLeads, there was an opportunity to grow the Canadian game, right? And that's where I saw a lot of those gaps. There just wasn't a lot out there for women in particular in the marketing standpoint, in the support standpoint, and the advocacy standpoint. Fortunately, I kind of lucked out, and I interviewed for this job at St. FX University, and it was really timely because I was praying for some help. My family had an intervention with me, so I was living the life, right? We were traveling to the States, we were doing college tours. We, on any given year, we're bringing in 100 college scouts to come see our athletes, and Team Canada identified athletes. But it just wasn't a job that was going to be sustainable. I wasn't able to pay any loans with it. I barely had, like, it was all inclusive, but it didn't pay, right? So it was one of those. But the networking I was able to do was incredible. The learning I was able to receive a lot of guidance, kind of understanding the business of things. I was also a dorm parent, so I lived with like 14 other teenage young women, and boy, was that an experience. I love all those kids. But yeah, so I interviewed for this job here at St. FX, and I didn't think I would have a shot at all. Actually, I needed to be convinced to interview, and ultimately it came down to St. FX and UPEI, and I did like a lot of homework on location, and I'd never been out east before, so it was a new change, and I packed up and headed over here in 2018-19. And when I took the job, I became the first female varsity coach that St. FX has ever hired in its athletics department, and also the first kind of Black female head coach in this space in the Maritimes. So now I'm in my third year. I would say I came in knowing it was going to be a lot of work, just rolling my sleeves up to rebuild a program back to national prominence. Didn't expect some of the pushback related to being a female and being a visible, very, very, very visible in a racial minority. And some of those challenges, I'm still, from its very onset and now, I'm still trying to understand if I can deal with this part of things. Now, From a passion standpoint, from a love standpoint, I mean, I love the game so much. I love coaching. I have an incredible, like, I have a dream job. There's only 56 of these positions across the country, I believe. So I certainly don't want to paint a picture that I don't like what I get to do. So I get to do it, I don't have to do it, especially in this kind of landscape. But it comes with its challenges. And that's why I think some of the challenges that I had, especially relating to my first year, had me thinking about, what other supports that are out there for people of color. And that's where I started to really say, okay, I kind of see how, I kind of see where this gap is that we can fill. Now, 2 years ago, I kind of put on my historian hat and started diving into government resources. What does Sport Canada say? What are some youth sport policies, if any, around racial discrimination, education policies for this? And I just started to see all these gaps. And then I knew growing up in a marginalized community that, man, like, our community leaders are like builders, like they are change agents or social agents, and they never get the acknowledgement they deserve.
Mm-hmm.
Then I found out about the original Black Coaches Association that was founded in the 80s, from some prominent African American basketball and football coaches. And I was like, okay, wow, do we have a Canadian version of this? So does this organization still exist? Can we make a Canadian branch? And so I started to think about those kind of things. When COVID hit, it definitely had me in a different space. So I'm single, I'm young, I'm a female, and I'm in a town that is predominantly white. Everyone is either married or is a senior citizen, or they are students here at St. FX. And my mom let me know right away, just with what was going on in Ontario, COVID wise, that she, like, don't even try to come home.
Right.
So I went from really overworking and like individuals. When I wasn't doing individuals, I'm like doing some scouting, doing some recruiting, practicing. We've got all these recruits coming up, and now I'm sitting on my hands staring at a wall, right, for however many months that is. And then the acts of racial violence really hit me differently as well, because with my late brother, one of the things that he did struggle with, that he talked to me a little bit about, was racial discrimination in the workplace, and his experiences just often being the only.
Right.
And back then I had no idea what that looked like, what that felt like, because up to that point I was always around other people who looked like me, and everyone that helped me was someone who looked like me. And then I left to the States, and everyone around me was culturally diverse. And it just, when you're an athlete, you're just tunnel visioned into taking care of things academically and then focusing on the sport. And so it really had me reflecting a lot. Ahmaud Arbery was killed on my birthday, February 23rd, and George Floyd passed away a day after my late brother's birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And I, as well as a number of sport coaches during this time, mostly basketball, university coaches, we were coming together routinely anyways, just to talk about what COVID looked like in different provinces, and what were you allowed to do? What are they saying about next season? What's going on? And that group actually turned into like some of the racialized minority coaches saying, hey, we need to have this other conversation about how we're trying to serve our athletes, because this is triggering just what we're seeing in the media and what we're hearing, and a lot of concern around that. And in talking to some of those coaches and talking to some of my mentors, everyone was like, Lee, like, if you're gonna do it, do it. Like, let's be intentional, create a platform. And so um, in late June, we incorporated the Black Canadian Coaches Association as a not-for-profit organization, and with little to no experience as to what a not-for-profit is and how it actually operates.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we wanted to be intentional about doing three things. The first was celebration and acknowledgement, and really shedding a positive light intentionally on people of color, against the many images and the racial tropes and stereotypes that we see about Black people and Indigenous groups and other people of color. The second was provide a way for us to strategize about advocacy through allyship, right? And so working with individuals, organizations, non-racialized minorities who understand how important this is, and that understand that we do have systemic issues here in Canada. And then the third being networking. And this was probably I don't even know how to quantify or put a value on something like this, but for someone like me, I realized that, you know, that there were other coaches across the country in isolated positions like this that really didn't know who to reach out to, and what to say and how to have those conversations. And so the networking piece has been just like phenomenal. It has also meant a lot for connecting athletes. So that's kind of our beginnings with the BCCA, and kind of where we're at now. And we're 8 months into our first year, and we're learning as we're definitely learning as we go. But we've been fortunate enough to work with a number of sport organizations. One of our first calls to action was for Canadian universities and colleges at the athletic department level to collect race-based data, because we haven't been doing that. And we've been able to work with PSOs and NSOs, as well as the Coaching Association of Canada and some other select groups around how we can advance this mission.
Wow, uh, what a journey. Um, and first, my condolences on your brother.
Thank you.
Mental health is absolutely at the forefront right now, and so it should be. And yeah, what a traumatic experience that you've had, and the difficulties. And I commend you on your strength to continue to move forward, and be a positive influence um, in your community, and in terms of being a black woman, but also in basketball and in sport in general. So congratulations, and it really is amazing what you've been able to do with some of the setbacks and the challenges that you've had. Um, when you were younger, and a young athlete, um, did you, or have you experienced discrimination, or um, people treating you differently because you were a person of color? um, and if you have, how did you deal with that? How did you manage that, and how did you overcome those challenges? And can you share that with our athletes?
Yeah, I would say growing up, I certainly wasn't educated in terms of like what systemic racism is, the difference between overt and covert racism, tokenism. So those things I was really ignorant to, just because of the sheer fact that I didn't learn it in school, and I didn't know anybody who really talked about things like that. What was normalized for me was just not seeing people of color in authoritative positions. So the many police officers that we would see in our community were all white. I had one black female teacher when I was in the fourth grade, Mrs. McCoy, and she was the only one. And I've never had a black female coach like coach me for a season. And so I had a lot of black men, which I'm grateful for, because they really became like the father figures and the support systems that I didn't have, just because my mom was always just worried about putting food on the table. But I
Mhm.
would say, like, just what I did notice was that people who look like me weren't taken seriously, if you will, because we never really had any money. So the economic power there just wasn't any. And yeah, like there was just that gap. From a personal level, I always felt like I've had my own challenges, even being around other people who look like me. And, I just was, again, I was like that oddball. I had hand me downs from my older brothers. I was a tomboy. And so I was used to I was used to people talking about me. Now, I mean, I like to think I was kind of popular, but, like I just was used to being different. And when I had lived in Vaughan for a few years, it was that same kind of difference, right? And in some ways, I knew some people were intimidated by me. Like that's something that I would just kind of pick up naturally, um, like just my peers in class. And I didn't even question why. I just, just maybe because I'm an athlete, maybe because I look strong. I'm not sure. Uh,
Mhm.
but I have had a few experiences with kind of some explicit um, words about race and racism. And like I remember being a junior in high school and going up to Hamilton for a tournament, and being one of the better teams in the city of Toronto. Like I think we were the first team to go back to back OFSA champs. But anyways, from the city. But I remember going to a tournament in Hamilton and it getting physical, and a parent just kind of spewing some hate speech from the bleachers, right? Like that's look at those N words, right? Like that's the reason why they're so aggressive. And there's a real from a sport standpoint, there are some real racial stereotypes and tropes, right? Like and as a Black coach, like we see it with how our athletes are identified for provincial team, national team. We see it in terms of how we deal with officials and the things that are said, and across all sports, apparently, from what I've been learning the last 7 or 8 months. So those things do stick with me. What I'll say even sticks out to me more is in doing a lot of the research, even for the BCCA, in 2019, Hamilton was like the leading city, I believe, in the country for like documented hate speech crimes, right? And so I'm just like if what? That I had my incident at that Hamilton High School in 2009. This is 10 years later, right? So those are the things that I find it's more so now in looking back that I'm like, whoa, like, okay, like that was not right. Like these are some of the policies and practices that really perpetuate racism. Even as a sport leader now, I think systemically there's a lot of things that I've identified and have started to call out as racism that I never considered as such. So I was always fortunate in that I was always like on the brighter side of academics. And, half the time, like I just started wearing glasses in my adulthood, but I almost never could see. So I just always would sit in the front of the class, but I loved learning. And so I was always like an A kid. So I never had a problem like receiving my AFA. But when you start to learn about academic streamlining and you start to think back to like, oh, wow, now I know why my friends were in those different classes without being formally tested. And what that means when you make that jump to go to a Canadian university, right? Where now in Ontario, you need an 80% just to receive an AFA. Well, all we're doing is perpetuating that systemic racism that occurs in our secondary schools and our primary schools, right? And so now as a sport leader, I'm recruiting first gen student athletes who are trying to be the first person like myself and their family to get a university degree, who are coming in with an LD that they've been diagnosed for 8 years without any formalized tools in that assessment. And now we're saying, guess what? If you don't have this super official documentation that says that you actually have something going on, you don't get support.
Right.
So before you start your first day of school, you're already steps behind because systemically what's being perpetuated at each level. So I would say like I'm more offended by, and not by a single person, but like I'm more discontent and wanting to rally around what I'm seeing now, because I do believe we can do better as a sport community than things I had gone through myself. On a personal level, when I moved up out to Nova Scotia, I was, I'm a historian, right? So I'm birthplace of African Canadian history. Oh my goodness, this is going to be incredible. Probably, Emancipation Day, and Black Heritage, African Heritage Month, and what's that going to look like? And actually, it's been quite the opposite. And, understanding that geographically there are different pods. Like I'm 2.5 hours removed from Halifax. I know about the North Preston area and the community and the Africville history. I know it's a tumultuous one. But there are a lot of systemic issues here that are kind of mixed with this sense of how it's always been done, right? Like that, and what they say about things that have always been done a certain kind of way, but they're not servicing everyone. It probably means that we're not doing it efficiently. It probably means that we're not doing it inclusively. And so these are the things that, like, if you ask me what I see now, I see a lot of inequality. I see a lot of inequities. I see a lot of harassment, opportunities for bullying. I actually I moderated a talk with Dr. Barrington Walker at Waterloo University, who specializes in law and immigration and Black Canadian history. And, he was talking about just by legal letter of the law, how easy it is for someone to protect their prejudices and really their racist sentiment behind what our letter of the law is in Canada. And he's like, even more so here than in America. So those are the things that I start thinking about and how we can play a leadership role in sport. I've I've dealt with racist parents, I've dealt with racist players, um, even in my young coaching career, I like to say. And, I do believe that there's a lot of room and growth that our sport community can have, but it takes us coming together to really see that vision.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And you saying that sport and community organizations can play a really big part in ending um, that systematic racism and changing people and changing the way they think and bringing people together. Um,
Hmm.
I think that's really important for people who are working in community sports and recreation and being able to bring or be inclusive and educate people and show them that these these things have been in place, and just because it's always been done doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
Hmm.
So yeah, I 100% agree with you on that, and there's still lots to do, absolutely.
Hmm.
And we'll there's people like yourself that'll continue um, to work on changing and on making that change. And I think you already in the 8 months that you've when you talk about the Black Canadian Coaches Association, I'm sure you've done more than you realize in terms of making that change and changing the dial sort of thing. So um, when it comes to your coaching and like you mentioned before, the first female coach at your university, um, and of course, being a Black female, how is that? Um, how is that your experience, or let's say your journey of getting into coaching? Because as we see across most sports, it's a white male dominated profession, and so what's that been like for you in making those inroads and breaking those barriers?
Yeah, I would say like I wouldn't even be in this position if it wasn't for two white males being intentional about opening a door for me, right? So that just speaks to that power, that power dynamic.
Hmm.
My AD at Laurier University, Peter Baxter, actually was one of the people who recommended I apply for this job. And as you know, there's zero Black athletic directors at the U Sport level now, but Leo McPherson played here at St. FX. He's the AD now, former president at what we now know as U Sports, formerly CIS. And, um, he wanted to, try something different, try something new, think about someone who's differently qualified for a job. And so, like, I'm forever grateful for the opportunity because without the giving up of power and acknowledging that hey, like we need to do things differently for different outcomes, I wouldn't have an opportunity to coach at the U Sport level. So I would say that's that's how I frame it at least. Like that's like from a very real standpoint. I don't believe that any people of color could have helped me get this position. As sad as that may sound, and I know that there's a number of different people who would have been just as qualified to come into a position like this. I do believe God created this opportunity for me, in faith in His works, and I think it's because He knew I'd be able to turn around and provide other young women who look like me opportunities. So we've gone from probably one of the most whitest teams in the country to now arguably the most diverse team in our conference and still going. We've got African and Scotian, we've got Black, we've got international students and Chinese kids, and I'm just I do believe that's part of my mission as a coach is to provide opportunities that otherwise wouldn't be there for kids and not even for kids, but for athletes generally. And I've been able to do things at the community outreach level. I would say I definitely stick out. I'm really hard to miss, and I've for the last 2.5 years, I've been trying to be intentional about doing good, doing positive things. So like we've gone from not having a community presence at all to having like a really positive community presence, and um, being a really poor team academically to now really bumping that up, getting some academic all Canadians. Our product on the floor has changed. It certainly has come with its challenges. I mean, people still assume, like, even after 2 years of coaching in this league, people still assume that my white assistant coach is the head coach of our team. So, like, I'll go to games and people will just beeline and assume that he's the head coach because I'm just a black female kind of sitting there. Um, like one of the things you did, Paul, is just ask me how do you pronounce your last name? Like we have people who just kind of like butchering my name to butcher my name. And then, of course, I think the implicit kind of biases that occur when you're talking to a woman in sport. So whether it's through officials and or through my own colleagues group, like a lot of things are written off as well. Um, a lot of people are afraid of change, right? So I don't know if it came from a, I mean, I think if it came from someone who didn't look like me, who was a white male, maybe some of these initiatives and stuff would be really taken up. And I would argue that, a lot of the ideas that I have, if someone else said them, they actually would be taken a little bit more seriously. But yeah, it's just part of this grind, I think. And I've just started to ask myself, like, how do I keep my peace, right? Like, what are the things that are worth fighting for? And usually, as it relates to my athletes, that's everything. But then willing to compromise on some things on a personal level.
Mm.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm often uh, just looking back at this 2.5 years now, and I'm actually my third year at St. FX, and it's a contract year for me. So
Yeah.
um, our team here decides if I'm going to be back, and also I have to decide if I will be back. And yeah, let's just say when I came in, obviously I've been, I will be forever grateful for this position that I'm in, because I just love being able to say I've had this experience, but I've gone from really tippy toeing on stuff because I'm not sure how it works to, being pretty emboldened about calling out wrong for wrong. And that's just the kind of person I am. I think it just is a reflection of my core values. And you know i I love sport. I love what sport can do anywhere, in any country, in any province. But it's that kind of negotiation that I think I've been trying to go through, is like, what actually can I help support and do and lead in whatever way possible, as it relates to underrepresented groups, and trying to rally around that cause, while of course still doing my job, right? I teach, I coach,
Yeah.
I take care of the athletes. So
Yeah. Um, and that's great. Thank you. In regards to, you've had your playing career and now you're into your coaching career.
mhm.
What kind of advice would you give to, your younger self or other athletes that, maybe black or a person of color? What kind of advice would you give to them that may be struggling um, with, um, discrimination, various forms of racism? And then I'll ask you the kind of the same thing when it comes to coaching, and if there's any differences. So maybe if you could talk about, um, as a player, and then maybe as a coach.
Sure. I would say as a player, it's interesting because I've been doing a lot of learning in sports that aren't as culturally diverse. So, like, one thing I definitely took for granted as a player was just looking left and looking right and knowing that it's likely that the other female or male that I'm training with is going through the same circumstance I am, which is usually no father at home, which is usually things are tough financially, which is usually like we got to find a way to make a better future. um, I would say for athletes who do not have that representation around them, don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to seek out other people who look like you. Don't be afraid to say, that's where your struggle lies. Is I don't feel understood. As it relates to being in a sport that maybe is really culturally diverse, I think just economically, I would have liked to have a little bit more knowledge. I mean, I would have loved if, from a financial literacy standpoint, someone showed me how to make a savings account and how important it was to put money aside. And I haven't by any means had a lot of money come through my hands my whole lifetime, but I just think it would have made a difference if someone really sat me down 14, 15 years ago. And I think it would put me in a different position as I continue to get older. As a coach, I just think that there's just an incredible deal of responsibility that is centered around um, really caring for people, and that's who the athletes are. They're people, regardless of what age they are. They're somebody's daughter. There's somebody's cousin, somebody's relative, and it starts with there's a quote, and it's something like players don't care how much you know until they know how much you care,
Mm.
right? So that's one way that I've really tried to grow. I felt like growing up, it was always back against the wall, and that certainly was a great motivator for me, and for many people it is, right? Like just trying to get out of your circumstance. But when you coach, there's just that extra accountability piece, right? And so dotting your I's, crossing your T's, leading with equity and not equality, and
Mm.
and sometimes it's like trying to get to answers without having the steps, right? So I see everything as an opportunity. I'm constantly reflecting on things that I can do better as a coach, on ways that I can seek feedback from my athletes. So one of the things I personally do is like we do anonymous coach feedback evaluations, right? Halfway throughout the year and at the end of the year. But then we also do like monthly check-ins with each athlete and just give them their own space. Cause I recognize that if I say my door is always open, they still won't come, right? Like you just many wouldn't. So I've tried to be intentional about that. I brought in a huge recruiting class my first year, rightfully so. But I knew that I couldn't go through that next year with them like I would a regular kind of yearly training plan year, because it just would have been overwhelming. And so we took some losses on the back end that year as we got around competing for a playoff bid, because I knew that I didn't want to overwhelm them in their first term as university student athletes that also are going to play 30 to 40 minutes a game.
Mhm.
So yeah, I would say constant reflection, constant seeking back feedback. And it doesn't mean you're just like, what should I do? I'm going to do it. But you can take it in. You could understand maybe there is a common trend that is coming up. I'm constantly thinking about blind spots and trying to educate myself in the X's and O's and the leadership. But I just feel like these kind of jobs are so much about growth and what you can instill in other people.
Mm.
I've also learned a little bit about giving up power and delegating, if you will, but in a positive way, right? Like helping my assistant coaches also feel like they are playing a role in things versus just telling them what to do or thinking that I still have to do every single thing by myself.
Mm.
So sometimes it's about being vulnerable and asking for help, right? And yeah, I think early on I had some challenges with just those tough conversations, but I feel like I've gotten better with that as well. And so it's just I want to continue to grow as a coach.
Yeah, and that's great, and I think that's in great feedback, great advice, and it also leads me into my next question or part of the discussion is um, what do you what do you want to do in terms of what the future holds for you and working, coaching, and working within the Black Coaches Association or the Black Canadian Coaches Association? What um, Yeah. So what's next?
What's next?
Big
Well,
question,
no
but
matter no matter where I am, what I do, I'm always going to be involved in sports in a hands-on way. Like I've had dreams of being a player development assistant coach in the NBA. I just think that's the coolest job. Like you train the athletes and help them improve, and you're at all the NBA games and help with some X's and O's. Um,
mhm,
but seriously, I really don't know. I just think that I think that we are breaking new ground in terms of the racial equity in sports. It's been incredible to see massive organizations in the corporate space, in the financial space, and the government space step up and try to support. We certainly want to position BCCA as we're a community of sorts. Like we've got a anti-racism experts community that um, is comprised of our leading academics that want to collect race-based data and now turn it into resources and publications that actually quite literally help change the narrative and educate. We want to establish anti-racism training with a sport lens focus, right? Um, how do implicit biases work in sport and for different kind of cultural groups from the BIPOC community. We've partnered with the Canadian Center for Mental Health and Sport to launch a Black Student Athlete Fund so that there are some practitioner and mental health and wellness supports for Black athletes that are at Canadian colleges and universities. And so we want to continue to grow this community as much as possible. As it pertains to my professional aspirations, I definitely want to continue to coach. Um, uh, I mean, I love where the journey has taken me thus far, and I would say I'm somebody that really leads with my heart. I'm a faith-based person, so every morning I do my Bible study, and I'm just constantly looking for better ways to do things. I'm constantly looking for ways that I can help empower and uplift other people. And I'm just thankful for the opportunities as they come. Like I said, this is my third year at X. I have no idea what's going to happen 4 months from now, but I have no doubt that um, I will put forth my best foot forward to continue to grow the sport community and contribute where I can.
That's that sounds great. It sounds exciting,
Mhm.
and of course, I and the club, wish you um, all great success in your career and in what you're doing. And we will definitely be watching out for you and of course Francis Xavier basketball team. Following the um, how the team does, of course, post COVID.
Mhm.
Um, and what we can do is we can share some contact information for the Black Canadian Coaches Association as well
Yes.
within this video to if anyone would like to reach out or get more information, then we'd be very happy to share that. And on
Might I add, we would love for everyone to fill out a BCCA membership form
yeah.
because we're all inclusive, right? It's all about that allyship. So we've got like a big subscriber community that we would like to grow on a national scale. We've run a number of events this year. Some have been around celebration and acknowledgement. Some have been around educational.
Mhm.
But really, like just an incredible platform. And so, for anyone, it could be a parent, it could be official, it could be someone who used to coach that is now retired, that is interested in meeting new people, that wants to support in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Please join our membership community.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We'll share that, and we'll do what we can to increase that membership and that connection. Um, on behalf of the club, I really want to thank you. It's been excellent to hear your journey and your continued journey as well. And thank you for the advice and information you provided to our members and anyone watching the video. And yeah, just a really big thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And um, again, we'll continue to watch and pay attention to you, and we wish you the best of luck in the future.
Thank you, Paul. It's been my pleasure.